with a short talk, which essentially aims to give you a little bit of an overview of what we have been doing within the framework of the Mask CBRN initiative over the past 2 or so years. I really have been very privileged to be part of this consortium together with colleagues from the Center of the Study of Democracy, and we've been implementing this together with partners from Germany, Greece, and Spain. I'll be introducing the entire consortium later on in the slides. But what we've managed to do is really we've managed to pull together a consortium of partners. First, with a very good geographic spread. So essentially, we are covering different parts of the European Union. When you look at the map, you'll see that. So we are very sort of regularly spread around the continent. And at the same time, we also bring together different types of expertise, simply because we've got research institutes, then we've got we've got an academic institution, we've got a private entity, an enterprise, and we also have a law enforcement agency on board. So you can see that in terms of types of stakeholders that have managed to come together within this consortium, but also in terms of a geographic spread, we've been quite quite lucky to put together this effort. And in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll just flesh out a little bit of what we've been doing over the past 2 or so years, and we'll introduce you some to the main outputs that we've had during the as part of our activities and as part of our work. And hopefully I would also build on some of the issues that have already been mentioned during the entire event today, both in the morning and also in the afternoon. Let's begin. So we've heard today throughout the entire panel in the morning, but also in the afternoon, the different types of threats and risks and that could be countered in the CBRN domain. That the security landscape has been changing since the end of the Cold War, and we've noticed the emergence of new and threats that before that I wouldn't say this, some of them were probably not entirely unthinkable, but at least not thought of that they'll manifest in that particular way as they manifest. And this slide really is just to illustrate and to summarize some of the issues and some of the threats that we are facing in this domain. I want to just go back to some of the issues that we've touched upon in the morning with the phenomenon of targeted assassinations involving CBRN or WMD materials. Here on the slide, you see Alexander Litvinenko who was poisoned with polonium, and that case was mentioned earlier this morning. And part of the reason why I think it's important to refer to that case and within this context also is that in a way it also provides an example of how those cases could be dealt with, because what we have here since last year, so in 2021, the European Court of Human Rights actually passed a judgment and had a decision and confirming that Litvinenko was essentially poisoned by individuals acting as agents of the state. So it took quite a lot of years to detect, investigate, identify the cause for his death, establish accountability, do the investigation, and but nevertheless, that decision in a way it can be considered as a landmark decision in that sense, because it's really something it's one approach of establishing accountability in those cases. And of course, I mean, in the decision, it says that the two individuals were acting as agents of the state, and that there is sufficient evidence to conclude that. And the respondent state in that case was the Russian Federation. The other example that I would like to bring in, and again, I think that was mentioned earlier this morning, but it's in a way, again, it's indicative of the type of threats that we are facing in this domain. That's the Cologne rice and bomb plot, where ISIS supporters use the darknet to obtain castor beans to try and build a rice and bomb. So in a way, that case illustrates the new ways, in a way, or the what kind of instruments or what kind of approaches agents that may want to cause harm are ready to make use of, and to realize their goals. And in that case, it's just the conflation of cyber-enabled crimes with this CBRN, within the CBRN domain, and what kind of issues that could raise, and so what implications that could have for assessing and preparing for dealing with this kind of threats in future. Again, I mean, those are, if we think about it, those are very broadly types of, in a way, showing the different the different landscape of threats posed by state and, in a way, non-state actors. And in both cases, we are already talking about activities that are not so easy to detect, using materials or agents that are not that easy to identify at first. Let's not forget that polonium poisoning was actually identified about a month after Mr. Litvinenko was admitted to hospital, and it was just a couple of days before his death that he was actually tested that might be a radiological poisoning. So no one really could think of that something of that kind could take place. So it's just sort of a couple of examples to help us think about and reflect on some of the issues also that we've been discussing during this morning and also this afternoon. So what we did within the MASC CBRN consortium to try and sort of make sense of that changing environment, risk environment in the CBRN domain. So we've done quite a lot of background research as part of our activities. Here, I have used one of the covers of the Bulgarian version of the report that was produced, and I would like to mention that I'm doing that simply because it's also for the benefit of the Bulgarian audience that we have, because we have quite a few of Bulgarian colleagues also joining us today during this session. But I'm fast to say that if you follow the link that is here on the slides, and the slides will be shared afterwards, and if you go on our project page, you'll see that those reports and publications, they're available in the different languages of the entire consortium. So all the main outputs, this and another report that I'll be referring to later on, are available in English, in German, in Bulgarian, Spanish, and Greek. So we've made sure that we covered different different target audiences within different countries. So whether this with within this research exercise that we had, essentially we were trying to identify what are some of the main trends and factors that impact on CBRN security risks, what are the types of those different security risks, and we did quite a lot of literature review to see what has been, what the literature has to say on that, some of the documented cases, some of the types of what could be expected in historical historical terms to occur as examples of misuse, and also what is the CBRN security risk and threat horizon. So how are possible threats developing, and what are the factors that impact on their development, and what kind of threats we are grappling with, and what kind of threats we are likely to grapple in the future. So this snapshot here, it's just for illustrative purposes. We try to come up with a very simplified typology of CBRN threats when we're thinking about the misuse of CBRN materials and related information. So we are looking both at the material aspects, and that would involve the agents, pathogens, radiological, nuclear material, you name it, but also the information that is that goes with that material, or that would allow manipulating that material. That would be research papers or essential information for how to access, manipulate, work with this material, or also essential information how to get hold of that material, for instance. So we are trying to cover both those in a way tangible and in a way intangible aspects related to CBRN. And in this typology of threats, we essentially try to look at different actors, so both states and non-state actors, and try to look at what are the different types of forms of misuse that could occur, and essentially try and bring them in some sort of a systematic format. And of course, we discovered, or rather we reached the conclusion that some of those issues are very intertwined, and the forms of misuse are not that different. However, they would manifest differently depending on whether they're coming from a state or non-state actor, pretty much because of very practical considerations and aspects that need to be taken into account, like resources that will be available, support and access to infrastructure, and you name it. It's very difficult to imagine that or not so difficult, but a non-state actor, a subgroup, subnational actor wouldn't necessarily have access to enormous or unlimited resources, for instance, to put together an entire WMD program or a program on a mass scale, whilst a state actor, as it has been in the past, and as it has happened in the past, states have been able to do that, and some states have even managed to do so and to continue developing those kinds of weapons even after they have been prohibited, and even after they have joined those international agreements and have signed up to different forms of international agreements and conventions prohibiting those kinds of activities. So going further, what we've been trying essentially to look at after sort of coming up with, or rather screening the surface and trying to understand what the possible threats are. We've tried to look at what are the potential goals of, when we think about if CBRN security is the sort of the buzz term that we've used for essentially covering the entire spectrum of activities or actions that need to be in place to counter the risk of misuse, essentially. And to break this down in a more sort of easy to grapple with language. So we've thought of this in terms of two interrelated objectives. And one would be that would entail safeguarding CBRN materials and related information against misuse and diversion. Prevention is key here, and that first goal, that first part of the goals would essentially cover that aspect. But also, here's where that understanding can become a little bit tricky, is because also looking at the need for ensuring effective preparedness and response to deliberate events. That would include, of course, countering actions coming from both states or no state actors, taking into account that the fact that there are international prohibitions or conventions or agreements that prohibit certain activities do not necessarily stop certain states from embarking on those kind of activities. And of course, realizing this goes, we would argue, requires an all-hazard approach for managing CBRN security risks. And because of the breadth of those interrelated goals, and because of the breadth of activities that would underpin the implementation of an all-hazard approach for CBRN risk management, it's important to consider that CBRN security considerations are mainstreamed into different areas of action. And here I would like to just pause and clarify a couple of points, because you hear, so far I've been talking mainly about CBRN security and CBRN security risks and CBRN threats all together. I just want to make sure that so we are not necessarily looking at the entire, so we are not looking necessarily at the spectrum altogether. We do understand that, so we do appreciate that there are different considerations, different factors impacting on chemical threats, biological threats, and radiological and nuclear threats, which we consider the last two can be pretty much taken together. But what we've been trying to do here is to try and rather focus on the processes that would underpin or that are involved in the countering the misuse of biological materials, chemical materials, radiological, nuclear materials, and try to identify the common elements in those processes. So that has very much been the focus of our work here. And we are not trying to say that there is no difference between chemical, biological, or radiological and nuclear threats, or that they all require one single approach to deal with, or any of that. Rather, we've been trying to look at how those entire spectrum of threats could be approached in a way, and what are the common elements in approaching those threats effectively and adequately, to essentially to counter them and to ensure that they don't manifest and they don't threaten societies. And as this figure just aims to essentially to illustrate some of those points, because what you see here is essentially so we've been trying to come up with a typology of the different regulations that are in place, or the entire regulation of the preventive misuse of chemical, biological, and radiological and nuclear materials, and sort of find the least common denominators across the entire spectrum. And when we're talking about international regulation, that's slightly easier, simply because the governance and the management of those risks in the different domains has more or less evolved and has followed similar ways of evolution and simple evolution trajectories. So we could look at that from the disarmament and non-proliferation perspective. And of course, there are the obvious differences where biological and chemical weapons are entirely prohibited under international law, whilst with nuclear weapons, there is the primary instrument still remains the Treaty on Nuclear Non-Proliferation even though there is the emerging norm that is on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. But let's not forget that this treaty has not yet been signed or ratified by any of the permanent five countries or member states of the Security Council, or for that matter, states that already possess nuclear weapons. So even here we've already noticed the obvious differences, but nevertheless it is possible to capture that thematic under certain heading. Export controls and dual use regulations, and those were briefly touched upon this morning. Counterterrorism, and here counterterrorism would entail, essentially, we would argue that efforts writ large to prevent and counter terrorist activities in all their forms would be pertinent to minimizing and countering the threat of CBRN or WMD terrorism, or terror groups, non-state actors getting hold of those kind of weapons or materials to pose threat. Safety and security, that would include occupational health and security within institutions, within critical infrastructure, within those organizations that handle materials, whether for production purposes, for commercial purposes, whether just for research purposes, repositories of materials, you name it. So this is, again, one very sort of a broad area where you would have procedures and practices and regulations and policies across the entire spectrum. So those will be, and again, there'll be different elements for whether that will concern biological facilities or chemical facilities or nuclear facilities or the control of radioactive materials. And the final sort of common element that we've wanted to focus a little bit more in our work is the information and the information security and cybersecurity aspects, because this is one area that is, again, very common across the board, and it's a cross-cutting for the entire, whether we are talking about chemical security or biological security or nuclear radiological security. That would include cybersecurity. It's critical infrastructure facilities, facilities that once again handle or use those kind of materials and agents and toxins and pathogens or chemical substances, or that are involved in the production, for example, of nuclear energy or you name it. And again, information and cybersecurity, given that a lot of the information nowadays in a digital format, digital form, it's good to consider both of those aspects. And when we think about those different elements of the international or of the management or the governance or regulation of those kind of risks, it's helpful to think of this as in a way as a web, where the goal is really to have sufficient amount of barriers or sufficient number of barriers so that whoever decides to go down the path of actually embarking on activities related or involving the misuse of those kind of materials, that there'll be sufficient number of barriers to prevent and to stop them essentially from doing so. And of course, all those elements would be then pertinent to strengthening and promoting and ensuring the resilience of international norms in the disarmament and non-proliferation arena. So with that in mind, we try to discern what CBRN security capacity at the national level might entail. And as you can imagine, and from what has just been said over the past few minutes, you might imagine that it was quite of a broad type of quite wide-ranging exercise that we tried to complete here on a task that we had ahead. But what we've tried to do is essentially we've tried to look at how capacity has been already approached in other different areas, and see if we can learn a little bit more from how it has been approached and already in other fields. And one helpful way of thinking about capacity is, in very basic terms, to consider capacity as the power of a given system or organization or an individual to produce certain functions, or to produce or to perform certain functions. And this is key because that essentially implies, so the main implication of that is that capacity is not then a fixed state, but it's part of a continuum process. So it's something that happens over time and requires continuing action. And in that sense, when we think about CBRN security capacity, so that would be the ability to perform functions of relevance to CBRN security effectively, efficiently, and sustainably. So that would mean preventing, safeguarding, preventing the misuse of those materials, i.e. countering the misuse and safeguarding those materials from misuse, and also making sure that in case of a deliberate incident that there is sufficient, that the system or the institutions, the actors that are involved in the response can respond to that kind of a event effectively, timely, and efficiently. So in that sense, we were trying to look at, and we've embarked on developing a dynamic model on CBRN security capacity that focuses on the interactions between the different competent authorities and stakeholders. So we focus not so much on, so we've highlighted what is needed to be there within a system to say that system would operate effectively, but the focus was more on how the elements within that system, or how the actors within that system would interact and essentially coordinate and operate and collaborate together. Right. So the purpose of this slide is essentially to give you just a snapshot of how we approach the idea of CBRN security capacity, and how we approach this in terms of dimensions, because capacity, the idea of capacity and the concept of capacity as a as the ability of the system to perform can be approached in terms of dimensions. And we've tried to use that model and see how that model might look like in the field of CBRN security. So we've identified 4 relevant dimensions. One would be the policy and regulatory dimension, the institutional dimension, and those are pretty much the obvious ones. But then there is the operational dimension and the technical dimension. And the operational and technical dimension are those that essentially would give that system its dynamic. So it's the part of this dynamic model, and would essentially characterize they'll be characteristic of this dynamic model, because they essentially would contain those elements that are relevant to how stakeholders and competent authorities and relevant actors within that system operate and interact and communicate when it comes to the realization of the goals related to CBRN security. And I'm fast to say that so this already this figure and some of the previous ones that I've mentioned, so they come from one of our main reports, and what we have called a methodology for national capacity assessment for countering the misuse of CBRN materials and information or knowledge. And that report is already available on our website, and nearly all the different language versions that we have aimed to produce that, and there are a couple of those to be added, but it's nearly completed. So if you're interested and to read and to look through that, and there is quite a lot of again also illustrative material that we've included there, and some of the background material, some of where the concepts come from. So provided in that report, and it can be accessed on our website, and I'll be referring to the link just in the next few slides. So when we are thinking about the dimensions of CBRN security capacity, we decided to go a little bit deeper with that model and essentially think about how each dimension of that model can be characterized. And it could be characterized in terms of modalities. And those indicative, so we've identified indicative modalities for each of the dimensions of that system level, what we call national level capacity. And in that methodology that we developed, we essentially have identified a set of questions that are designed to help collect and generate data for those different indicative modalities. And of course, I mean, the modalities are not necessarily, the list is not exhaustive, but the questions that we provided there, that's why they're sort of more general, but they're designed to sort of elicit as much information as possible. And if that framework is applied in practice, then it can be applied either to specific domains, say for biological, so capacity for national biological security, or just in the realm of chemical security, or just in the realm of radiological nuclear security, or it can be applied across the entire, all the different domains to collect data, what is happening in all those different spheres at the national level, and the amount of data that will be generated can then be used to develop an in-depth picture of what is essentially happening at national level. And the goal of that exercise, of course, would be either to, well, could be, for instance, to have a snapshot of the current situation, what already exists in terms of capacity, but also could be used to identify existing good practices, or also good practices that may be transferable from one area to another. And it could also provide insights for how that capacity could be sustained over time. Because one of the important factors is not only of how we build capacity, but also how we sustain it. So the fact that one system may have good capacity at one point in time does not necessarily guarantee that capacity would remain unchanged over time. So identifying ways and options for sustaining that capacity and for ensuring that capacity would remain effective and adequate to address also emerging and future threats. It's of key importance here. So in the next couple of slides, what I have done is just essentially taken out some of the indicative modalities that we have identified for each of the different dimensions. So you can see here for the policy regulatory dimension. So that will be essentially looking at what are different policy strategic frameworks at the national level, relevant regulations, legal acts, laws, you name it, but also certification, licensing procedures, any standard setting documents and initiatives, guidelines, and also voluntary initiatives, and also options for sector self-regulation, be it, for instance, at industrial level or academic, or more civil society, sort of more broader civil society level. So for the institutional dimension, again, looking at what are the competent authorities, whether that will be designated to meet certain international functions and international sort of requirements, or that those will be specific for as prescribed in national regulations and national acts, specialized agencies that will involve, that perform functions that are of relevance to CBRN security, any designated that could be departments or units, so it doesn't necessarily need to be just an entire sort of organization, specialized agency. So it could be, in some institutions, it can be a specific department, office, committees, and also designated officers. So for instance, people within certain facilities where they may have people responsible for safety security, those may be just one or two individuals, but nevertheless, they would still be considered under this this dimension for the purposes of the system level or national level assessment. Going further, so this is where it becomes really interesting, and I'll be referring to the operational dimension in the next couple of slides as well. Here, I'm just going to briefly cover some of the issues that we have identified, or some of the indicative modalities that we've thought it would be worth focusing. And essentially, those are already more related to what actions or what activities need to be implemented, how are those activities essentially implemented. So more of a qualitative type of, in a way, assessment or qualitative sort of screening of the situation. And those are all sort of processes and activities that are relevant to countering the misuse of CBRN materials and information. And it's quite of a long list. I wouldn't necessarily go into that into greater detail just yet, because I'll be returning to this point in the next couple of slides. But you can see that. So the activities range from activities related to prevention, material accountability, and verifications and inspections, and you name it, licensing, to activities that are related to response in case of an event that need to be investigated, but also incident management and provision of medical care, medical assistance, securing the incident site, investigation, identification of suspects, and you name it, and also risk communication with. We've sort of thought that's one aspect that would require attention here, and in a very broad term. So here, risk communication really would essentially cover issues related to how level of awareness about those risks within people, within different professional communities, within those sectors, and working within those fields, to activities related, for instance, to strategic communication and essentially reaching out to the public regarding relevant policy and regulatory or government-led initiatives and actions. So a very broad sort of set of activities that would go under this kind of a heading. And finally, we've got the technical dimension, where we've got also a sort of a comprehensive list of indicative modalities, where that essentially would more refer to what is available for the performance of. So if the operational dimension essentially refers to what functions or what activities or what actions need to be taken, implemented, and completed. So here is more what do you need to complete those activities on a regular basis, and that would cover the availability of specialized equipment, that is well maintained, and any resources that are available, and that would include different systems and technology, be it for the physical protection of sensitive materials, but also for tracking and the tracing of that kind of material, for data exchange, for electronic record keeping, for cybersecurity, the availability of trained personnel at public and private sectors, level of professionals, so the availability of professional competence and expertise, again, both in public and private sectors, and also the availability of options and resources and opportunities for technology development, procurement, and its effective and efficient maintenance. So to sum up what have been said just until now, so we try to, in a way, come up with an elegant way of summarizing all that information in a way that is not that, try to bring all that abstract subject matter to a more of a practical type of in a way template, but template is a little bit too strong of a word, but just at this table, what we've tried to do is really to try and bring all those different dimensions and how the information that is collected about all those different dimensions could be categorized in a systematic way. And we sort of come up with three areas that are in a way common for each of those dimensions, that how the collected data could be organized, and that would include defense and civil protection, counterterrorism, and oversight of activities that would involve chemical, biological, nuclear, or radioactive materials or related information. So the idea of this was really to sort of try and bring all that material together in a more of an organized way, and it's, once again, it's indicative. So it's one way of approaching that to make sure that all the information that is collected throughout the questions, because for each set of modalities there are questions in the methodology, and when you're collecting the data, that data can be organized around those thematic headings for each of the different domains or each of the different threat areas, so to speak. So as I mentioned, I'm now returning to the operational dimension that we had in the methodology, because one of the outputs that we had as part of the project essentially was sort of a training guide, which is designed to facilitate the preparedness and training of individuals involved in the designated as first responders in case of a deliberate CBRN event. And of course, I mean, when we are referring to a deliberate CBRN event, probably the more precise term would be events where there is a suspected use of CBRN materials, and that, of course, suspicious event where that may also be of suspicious origins, and where not necessarily related to an industrial accident or something happening as a result of a natural disaster or a natural disease outbreak, more of events of deliberate sort of character. And again, this publication here, you see the cover of the Bulgarian version of the guide, but that publication is available in as similarly to the methodology. Actually, it's available in German, Greek, English, and Spanish. You can find information of how to access that publication on our project website. But very, very quickly and very briefly about this publication. So essentially, the goal is to facilitate the practical application of the principles, concepts, and procedures for interagency interoperability, but also coordination and communication during the response to CBRN events. The guide itself contains thematic scenarios, and those thematic scenarios are all accompanied with additional sort of topics and suggested topics and issues for consideration and discussion, and as such could complement that part of the implementation of the methodology that refers to the operational aspects. So it could be used for instance, for carrying out tabletop exercises or for field exercises to try to test different manuals or instructions or already existing tools or procedures for managing those kind of event sites. And the scenarios that are contained in the guide, they are all fictitious, but are based on real life cases. And all the scenarios essentially refer to to incidents or to deliberate events caused by non-state actors. But each of those scenarios can, of course, be tailored and adapted to different kind of threats and to illustrate different kind of threats. And the reason for that, why is it to adapt them? It's essentially that the scenarios have been developed as part of thematic exercises. So there are in total there are 5 thematic exercises, and those exercises focus on try to bring together specific issues related to CBRN threats. So they focus on, for instance, threats in nuclear security, biological security, chemical security domain, but they also try to bring together different aspects, for instance, related to the manifestation of the insider threat or cyber-enabled crimes, and how those are relevant to CBRN security, to the protection of critical infrastructure and the risk of explosive devices when it comes to CBRN, then impact of emerging technology, and also there is a scenario that specifically looks at hoax incidents. So in that sense, the goal here is to cover a very broad set of issues with regard to the CBRN threat spectrum. I'm just wrapping up here now. As I promised, here is our small but efficient, as you could see, project consortium. So besides our institution, the Center for the Study of Democracy, so we've got the Police Academy in Bavaria, who have partnered with us on this, the Center for Security Studies in Greece, CHEMEA, the way they are more famous in this arena, and also our Spanish partners from IBATEC and the security guard or the police force of the Basque Country in Spain. So together with our partners, we've been sort of working on and implementing those activities. And as a final snapshot, I just wanted to bring in our just a quick snapshot of our website with resources that have already been developed within the framework of the project, and I would like to encourage you to explore and get more information about. That's our webpage, where you can find all the different publications and materials that have been produced, and there are some additional yet to come. So watch that space. We also try to look at and post and regularly keep up to date with different developments within the field of CBRN security and identify, for instance, relevant policy initiatives, relevant publications or news pieces, and raise awareness of those as well. Once again, I'll just encourage you to go and check out our website. And with that, I would like to thank you all for the attention. I do apologize because I suspect that I've gone massively over time. And I would like to really thank you for listening and for